Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Now that we have completed the narrative speeches, we will move on to listening and note-taking skills, which are extremely important to develop for your courses at university. For those of you who are also planning to study abroad in the near future in an all-English-speaking environment, acquiring these skills will be even more important. At high school, you may or may not have experienced college-style lectures, but when I was in high school, I used to remember how I was trying to write down everything that my teachers wrote down or spoke during a lesson. And I think, back then, teachers would take their time to let us write down everything. But here at university, or at least in classes taught in English, it is not advisable to write down everything you see and listen. University lectures tend to be very fast-paced, and if you focus too much on writing down everything, you tend to pay attention only to the words being copied onto a piece of paper and not much on what your professor is trying to say. As explained in the first lecture 2 weeks ago, one of the main purposes of this course is to help students develop effective study skills. Therefore, one aspect of these study skills is to get students prepared for lectures at university. When you enter a classroom and you know that your professor is going to give a lecture on a certain topic, it is extremely important you obtain some idea or background knowledge of the topic that is going to be presented. This can be done in several ways. If you take a look at the slide here, the first strategy is to think about what you already know about the lecture's topic. It doesn't matter if the topic is very complicated to understand, but you need to get some idea of what you already know. Second, another way is to complete any reading assignments that are connected to the lecture. Many professors would assign reading material before the professor discusses it. Therefore, it is extremely important you complete these assignments. I repeat, complete any required reading beforehand because your professor believes this is necessary to understand what he or she is going to say in class. And lastly, discuss the topic and the reading material with your classmates and friends before the lecture. Research shows that if students do this beforehand, they will have a better understanding of the lecture content. Some of you may ask, how do you know what the professor will lecture about in the next class? Well, there are several ways to find out. First, the most obvious one, your professor will tell you the class before, or you can ask him or her directly. Second, professors usually have the topic of the lecture in the syllabus. And finally, you can, more or less, guess what the topic is going to be about by looking at your reading assignments. Let me give you an analogy for why this process is so important. Imagine you're going to the movie theater. Are you going to enter the movie theater without knowing what you will be watching? Of course not. If you just entered a room randomly in a movie theater without knowing what to expect, your mind will have a difficult time processing what is going on in the movie. If, for example, you went to watch the latest Star Wars movie, you would at least know what is going on what's going on because you watched the previous movies before it. This is the same thing for lectures. If you have some knowledge of the topic, then your brain is better prepared in processing the information you'll be listening to. This leads to this week's lesson assignments. First, you need to read 2 articles that are available on Manaba, the Dhaka Tribune article and the article from The Guardian. This was assigned as homework many days ago. As you have read, you should have taken notes and also try to guess what the lecture is going to be about. The lecture will be provided to you towards the end of the lesson. Next, make sure you download the worksheet that comes with this lesson. The file for the worksheet is called Lecture Language for Topic and Plan. And finally, complete exercises A through G on the worksheet, and make sure you go each exercise one by one as you follow this PowerPoint presentation. Before you move on to the next slide, pause this video and make sure you read the articles and download the worksheet if you have not done so yet. You will not be able to complete the worksheet if you have not done the reading. Warning: do not skip parts through this lesson and try to take shortcuts in order to complete the worksheet. Not only you will have problems completing the worksheet, but more importantly, lessons that I will provide later in the semester will assume that you have understood what I explain here. And who knows, I may give a quiz sometime in the future. If you are on this slide, it means you have read the 2 articles and have downloaded the worksheet. Let's start with exercise A. Read the following book blurb for Displaced, Stories from Syrian Diaspora, and answer the corresponding question. Once you have finished reading, answer the following questions in the big box below. The questions are, what do you know about the Syrian diaspora? And second, why do you think the authors emphasize individual stories in their book? thoroughly explain your answers. Pause this video now. If you're done with exercise A, you can move on to the next slide. This is exercise B, building your vocabulary. Match the words with your definitions. Look back at the articles you have read for homework to check your answers. Here, just simply put the numbers in the corresponding boxes. Before you begin, one important point to note here is that if you have any reading homework before a lecture, it is important to look for definitions of key words. Since these key words may be used in a lecture, it is crucial to understand them since it will facilitate your understanding once that word is raised during the lecture. This is the reason why I have this vocabulary exercise here. Pause this video now and complete exercise B. If you're done with this exercise, you can move on to the next slide. Now we are in exercise C. Using the vocabulary list above, write answers to the following questions. Once complete, copy your answers on the Manaba forum so the rest of the class can see. As you read each other's answers, revise your answers in this handout. Students must use the vocabulary words in their answers and use the readings for homework when appropriate. Pause this video now and complete exercise C. Before you move on to exercise D, you will need to do the following. As I mentioned earlier, first, copy and paste all answers from exercise C into the form. Second, make sure to number each answer clearly from 1 to 5. 3. Make sure to find the correct form. The form will be clearly labeled. And lastly, read each other's answers and revise accordingly. When you revise your answers, do not copy each other's answers, but make revisions into your own words. Pause this video now before you move on. Now we will cover the first listening strategy. When professors present lectures, they usually, not always, but usually presents the main topic of the lecture towards the beginning of the lecture. So here, you need to listen for the words and expressions that professors use to indicate the topic. And this is important, because when you take notes for the lecture, you need to write down towards the top what the topic is. Furthermore, after presenting the topic of the lecture, professors usually provide a plan of the lecture, meaning the lecturer would give a preview of how the lecture is going to be organized. And this is also important because if the professor tells you how the presentation or lecture is organized, you can be better prepared to take notes by paying attention to keywords that are associated to that plan, and therefore take notes accordingly. So here are some examples of expressions used to indicate the topic of a lecture. Copy these expressions in the box located in the middle of page 3. It says, on the space below, from the screen, copy the expressions used to signal a topic. Remember, these are just a few examples of how topics can be introduced. Therefore, you need to pay attention very clearly how professors introduce topics. Here are expressions used for introducing the plan, or in other words, how the lecture is going to be organized. Again, similarly to the expressions for the topic, it is important to copy these expressions in the same box. Let's practice identifying these expressions by completing exercise D in the handout. Read the excerpt from a lecture about displaced people in Fukushima. Find the lecture language that signals a new topic or planning of the lecture and copy them in the space below. So here, what you need to do is read the paragraph below and find those expressions introducing the topic and plan. Copy these expressions into the box below. Pause the video now and complete the exercise. If you are done, you can move on towards the next slide. Now we will be working on exercise E. Here, you need to download the audio file for this exercise on Manaba. Find the file named Exercise E, Audio Topic and Plan. Once you have downloaded the file, listen to the audio recording. Listen to the introductions of 3 different lectures. First, listen to each introduction and write down the topic lecture language and the topic. Listen to each introduction again and write down the lecture language that signals a plan and also the plan. If you are confused on how to fill in the blanks on your worksheet, this slide contains the answers for the first introduction. Listen to the first introduction and see how I completed the answers. Once you're done here, listen to the other 2 introductions and complete your answers. Pause this video right now and complete this exercise. If you are done, you can move on to the next slide. So now we are at the top of page 5 of your handout. I am going to talk about note-taking strategies, specifically how to organize your notes into an informal outline. As explained earlier in this lesson, taking notes is an important aspect of learning at university. Without taking notes, you will have a difficult time processing the information you get from your classes. Like I said way earlier, notes should not be a word-by-word script of what your professor says during a lecture. Instead, as I have written here in this slide at the beginning, notes are visual representations of relationships between ideas. In other words, the words you include in your notes should serve as reminders of what the lecture is about. Second, similarly to the outlines you have made for your narrative speeches, you need to use spaces and indentation to show which ideas are main points and supporting points. Therefore, as stated in my third point here, you need to differentiate main points from supporting points so that you can study more effectively. What I mean by spaces and indentation can be seen here. We can clearly see the main topic of the sample here and two main points, geographic and demographic. These are the two main kinds of market research. Each kind of market research contains 3 supporting aspects, and some of these aspects contains examples. This slide, I hope, will help you better understand this. So here is an example of notes for a lecture on body language and oral presentations. You can clearly see how spaces and indentation is being used to show the differences between main points and supporting points. You can also see examples as well. This is what I would like to see when you take notes for lectures. For exercise F, read the following lecture excerpt and take notes in the outline form on a separate sheet of paper. Once complete, copy your notes into the space that is provided on your worksheet. In other words, pretend this is a sample lecture. How would you organize your notes based on this sample? Pause this video now and complete the exercise. Once you're done, move on to the next slide. Now you're on the last exercise, exercise G. Here, you need to watch the lecture and take notes on a separate sheet of paper. The link to the lecture is available on Manaba. Remember to listen for the lecture language that signals the topic and lecture plan. What's important here is that you capture the topic of the lecture, which will be presented towards the beginning of the lecture. You should write this in your notes immediately once you hear it. Also, you should write down the plan of the lecture. This should also help you understand how the lecture is structured. Once complete, copy your notes on the space provided on page 6. Now remember, in a real lecture, you cannot pause what the professor is saying. Once the lecture is over, it's over. You cannot rewind what the professor said. So in this case, of course, you can pause and rewind if you like, but this won't be good practice. When you write your notes, listen to the whole lecture in its entirety, meaning watch and listen to the lecture without stopping. If you feel you need to listen to it again, wait until you finish watching it first, then you can play from the start again. Don't go back to specific parts because that's not going to help you. What I'm trying to say here is you need to pretend that these lectures are live lectures. So now, pause this PowerPoint presentation and go watch the lecture. If you're done, you can move on to the next slide. Once you have completed all exercises, upload your worksheet back to Manaba. I hope in this lesson you understood the importance of taking notes and how to take notes. I also hope you can identify key expressions in introducing the topic and plan of a lecture. Furthermore, I hope the sample lecture helped you understand how the professor presented the topic and plan and how she structured the rest of the presentation. And lastly, please keep these expressions in mind because you will be using these expressions as well when you make your own presentations.